Hello, everybody, and well, we had Easter, so hopefully everyone had a good meal, had some time with the family, and so on. And on top of that, we also had UFC in action, and we had Bellator in action. And first up, let's deal with some stuff that's not from these two fight cards. The predominant news item, I think, right now is twofold. Number one is the Henry Cejudo. Is he going to come out of retirement? Is the UFC going to pay him thing? And there's been some interesting ideas thrown around about that. That the problem is that he wants a title shot or whatever. Let's be honest here, people. The UFC doesn't do, doesn't have Henry Cejudo fighting right now for one reason: paycheck. He wants more money. The UFC historically has not been willing to play ball with someone who wants more money. The only exceptions are basically generational superstars. That'd be like a Ronda Rousey or a Conor McGregor, where the UFC would bend over backwards to accommodate them. Or people that Dana really, really likes, or people who give them entrance to a market that they covet, that they want, and believe that they're the key to it. So that would be like a CM Punk or a Ken Shamrock or Habib with the Middle East. Probably Weili Zhang, if she ever wanted to try to play hardball, could probably get a significant pay bump because of the Chinese market. But we've seen, and sure, there are some people that don't count this. Aljamain Sterling did pretty well in his first round of free agency with them after a long fight. There are other people who you could say that about as well. But we've seen from like the John Jones stuff, you ask for money, the UFC does not like what you're asking for. That's just all there is to it. They love their 20% pay rate for fighters, they love their record profits, and depressing fighter pay is key to that. And obviously, the lack of actual competition sets up no real market for the fighters to really play anything off of it. And of course, they're under contract a lot of the time. So, like, the contract dispute with Francis Ngannou, John Jones, that are going on right now are great examples of this. Henry Cejudo is another one. And there are various others. These are high-profile fighters, high value to the company, and they still can't get leverage to get paid. And then the other thing is, of course, the sad story of Cain Velasquez, in the sense that he's probably going to jail. He shot a man. As far as we know, an innocent man too, is the stepfather of the man who is alleged to have molested a family member of Cain Velasquez's, which is a big deal. And he is, well, he chased him through traffic and shot at him and hit the wrong person. Here's the thing: there's been a lot of hot takes led by like Josh Thompson, and to be clear, like Josh Thompson's a personal friend of Cain's. He's a training partner. There's a ton of like reasons why he would absolutely want to back his man, and I respect that in a way. But at the same time, there's talk about like how the justice system has actually failed Cain Velasquez. I don't see how. Now, to be clear, one, on his own case, I don't think the justice system has failed him because, to be clear, he endangered people that went beyond the molester. Even if you believe, like, his actions against that person were correct and appropriate, there is a whole several hundred people probably that were in danger because of this chase. And that's not really justifiable in any way when it comes down to it. And then on top of that, you have him shooting the wrong person. And of course, then from the legal standpoint, in regards to the molestation case, he's not had his day in court. Now, granted, the U.S. justice system and the Canadian justice system where I live are incredibly bad about like what to do with criminals that are, or people that are accused of crimes, because you have, of course, the remanded jail, which people would argue is punishing someone before they've been found guilty. You have bail, which has its own significant set of financial problems about being able to apply that evenly across the spread. And then you have, on top of that, you have the personal reconnaissance, which is what he got, which seems like a risk too far. And honestly, there's probably something to be done with reforming the whole system in that regard. So, in that regard, it kind of did, but he hasn't had his day in court. He hasn't been found bullshit innocent or anything like that. So, I don't. I'm sorry if this comes off as like, I don't know, Cain hate. Someone was labeled me as that. Um, no, he's getting largely what he deserves for a lack of patience with the legal system, and he's paying the price. Let's get onto the card, though, because it is slightly happier days. Okay. So we're going to go through the UFC card first because there's more to talk about. It's not that the fights were more important or even better, because I'd argue actually in both cases they weren't. But there's a lot to talk about because, of course, we had 2 technical decisions on this card. We had a lot of fouls. We had a whole can of worms that is Munir Lazez shouting out Daniel Kinahan. And I have some thoughts on that and some things I think definitely need to be spoken in that regard. So let's start at the top of the card. Belal Muhammad and Vicente Luque. Credit to Vicente Luque where it's due. Man came up with a perfect plan. Worked some lovely feinting, stand switches. Worked his wrestling off of striking very, very well. Looked great. Looked fantastic. Let's get to the downside. And he did this all during Ramadan. But let's get to the downside. And the downside is pretty simple, is that I don't know that this really does anything for him. Like, it puts him in the top 5 ranked fighters in the division. Like, realistically, you put him behind Usman, you put him behind Covington, Khamzat, and probably Gilbert Burns. And Leon Edwards. And that's probably about it. But at the same time, like, there's no fight there for him. If we're going on merit, Edwards gets the title shot against Usman, and you do the Covington versus Chimaev fight because that's really, really interesting, and far more interesting than Belal is against either of those fighters. And the problem also is that, granted, he showed the ability to come back, beat a guy that had beat him before, and I cannot undersell that enough in Vicente Luque, but it's also a guy whose weaknesses and the ways that Muhammad exploited them are not available. Well, excuse me, I'm going to take a quick drink. Are not available against those guys above him because they're stronger wrestlers. They're more put together grapplers than Luque is. Like, Luque is a super venomous grappler, off his back, great Darce choke, great everything. But he's historically been very willing to give up takedowns. I don't think this fight was really all that much different. And he's a guy who wants to strike with you and isn't going to bring a wrestling game of his own. Like, what I'm saying is that a fight between Luque and Muhammad that we just saw is not remotely in any way similar to what Muhammad versus Usman, Muhammad versus Burns, Muhammad versus Covington, Muhammad versus Chimaev, or even Muhammad versus Edwards would be. Because they are tremendously differently structured fighters to Vicente Luque. And it's not even they are better than him, but the primary reason I'm talking about that is not that they're necessarily better than him. It's just it's not the same dynamic. And of course, it didn't make him any fans because a lot of people were bored by the fight. They're angry at Belal Muhammad for making a Vicente Luque fight boring. I didn't find it boring. I found it fascinating. Is it as exciting as, say, Luque versus Brian Barberena? No, but those are 2 all-time great action fighters. I think this was a perfectly fine fight. This was fun. I enjoyed it. It's just one of those things where I don't really know what to do with Muhammad after this because who do you put him up against? Because you don't want to put him up against someone lower in the rankings. That seems like distinctly unfair to Belal. But there's no dance partner above him that's really available, aside from doing something with Gilbert Burns, maybe. But the problem is that the UFC has said Burns is due for a big fight. I don't think they view that as Muhammad. And 2, that's Burns off of a loss. And that feels kind of awkward as well. So I don't know what you do with Belal Muhammad right now. Admittedly, I will say this. Had Luque won the fight, I also don't really know what I would do with Luque had he won. I think these 2 are just kind of in like this no man's zone where it's like the 2 of them are together in the rankings and there's no one else really there. Everyone else is like a step below or just a step a little bit too above. So that's interestingly problematic for the guy who's, number 5 in the rankings, number 6 probably in the world. right now at 170. Of course, that is also spawned a question about like how deep is the 170 division because, excuse me, I'm a little stuffed up today. But we have the whole thing of like how good is this division that Belal Muhammad ranks number 5 in it, and I definitely see where people are saying about it. He's kind of an uninspiring fighter at the number 5 spot because of his lack of physicality. Like he doesn't hit hard, doesn't have a particularly venomous submission game. He's very much a decision machine, very much kind of the new John Fitch, if it were. But at the same time, John Fitch was number 2 in his division for like a really, really long time. So, I mean, I don't know. 170, I guess, is kind of in this gray zone where it'll go through periods of being really deep and then really thin. I mean, it is a division where Tyron Woodley reigned for quite some time, despite being a tremendously flawed fighter. And I don't think I think I was on hiatus from doing anything really MMA video or podcast related during the Woodley times, but he always just was really a poorly structured fighter. He was a guy who was really, really willing to let you walk him into the cage, have your own way, control the distance, control everything, and so on, and just kind of rely on the big bang of his heavy hands and very good wrestling. But that eventually caught up to him with Kamaru Usman, and then obviously it really caught up to him when he started losing a little bit of reaction speed, and it eventually corresponded to a knockout loss to Jake Paul. Um, so I think I don't think I really have to say a tremendous more about that. Our first technical decision of the night went to Kyle Bohio against Gadzi Omar Gadziev. What to say about this fight? I mean, it was weird. And like, I think this was the fight I was most wrong about on the card. Not because of who won, but because the dynamic really wasn't what I expected it to be. Omar Gadziev actually did notably better on the feet than I expected him to. And then it was the ground game of Bohio that carried the day. He had supremely good control from the back position. He did good work. He got some damage in. It was a really, really good performance, and then he beat a downed opponent and had a point taken away, and it went to technical decision. Omar Gadziev, I think if I'm being honest, probably did milk it a little bit, trying to get maybe a DQ victory. Didn't happen. Lost by technical decision. So that's all that's right in the world. Of course, this whole thing is like spawned the whole question of like why technical decisions, when's a point taken away, and so on. And of course, the whole like knees to a downed opponent debate that always comes up when these happen. People, of course, most notably with like Peter Yan and Aljamain Sterling, like, why would you have your hand down? I mean, there are plenty of reasons why that hand would be down. There are plenty of reasons why you'd be on your knees, and at various points. I mean, this is fighting. You end up in these positions, and it happens quite frequently. And yeah, sure, it could be also someone trying to milk it and avoid getting kneed in the head. My personal opinion has always been that knees to a ground opponent should actually be legal. In my experience, and that's obviously not at a UFC level. That's not not in the heat of battle. That's not against even someone like a Bohio in the cage. I don't think that inherently knees to a grounded opponent are necessarily more dangerous than knees in another position. I think they can be if you don't see them, but that's a fact of not seeing the knee. Like, I have no doubt that Omar Gadziev got floored by this knee in a way that he wouldn't have been floored by like a tie clinch knee, but it's because he didn't see it, not because of the position, if that makes any sense. I personally have always been on the favor of just putting it there, and I don't really know why. It's not because the knees to a ground opponent would actually be very, very useful for like anti-wrestler work, which the UFC has been trying to figure out a way to be anti-wrestler without just strict up making wrestling illegal for like a long time. Because obviously the fandom is, going back to the Belal Muhammad fight, wrestling boring, which is kind of weird given Randy Couture and like Matt Hughes' popularity back in the day. But at the same time, it definitely is a case where the fandom wants less wrestling. The UFC and Dana White specifically have always been kind of anti-wrestler. And a way to handle that would be to allow knees to a ground opponent. So like when a failed takedown comes in, you can just knee him. It would change the game a little bit. So I'm surprised it's still illegal. That has admittedly always been something that greatly puzzles me. Aside from that, I don't know what else to say about this fight because obviously I don't. This was the first major test for Omar Gatsiev, and he did lose, and honestly lost in his strong wheelhouse. So that makes me worry about what he can do going forward. But at the same time, it could just be that he's not that good, and Bahayo really isn't particularly amazing. We'll see. I mean, I'm interested to see both fighters fight beyond this. I still don't know why this was the co-main event, but it was reasonable enough. I did enjoy it. It was a good display of Demi and Maya style jiu-jitsu. And yeah, I still have like doubts of like how well Bahayo will function with his like hybrid Lyoto Machida Demi and Maya style. But I'm intrigued to see what happens. And I guess that's the best you can do off of ADUB like this. Andre Thialo defeated Miguel Baeza. This fight's been kind of interesting to me, mostly because of the Twitter discussions I've been in about it. Because, of course, someone was talking about Ian Gary and listing off welterweights that could probably beat him. And one of them he listed was Miguel Baeza, which I disagreed with. Because I think as much as I'm not a believer in Ian Gary. He's young enough that he might turn into something and obviously develop, but he's definitely not worth the hype that he's trying to put on himself. And I don't blame him. I want to be clear about that because like generating hype about yourself is how you get paid. It's how you get bookings. It's how you get up on the card. It's how you get any kind of credibility when it comes to negotiating a contract. So like, do your thing, but I don't buy it. And we were talking about like if Miguel Baeza could beat him. I don't think so. Baeza I think the problem for Miguel Baeza is basically twofold. One, he's at the wrong gym. As far as I know, he's at MMA Masters. If I'm wrong on that, please let me know. But I assume he's at MMA Masters. That's why he's listed at Topology. And I've seen some pictures of him still with people who are also associated with MMA Masters. So I assume he's still there. And they're not historically a gym that develops that kind of slickster outfighting style that Baez is trying to go with, where like he's going to use his footwork to keep the range. He's going to land a lot of good counter shots. He's going to have that slick defensive movement and so on. And the problem is that he's just missing everything you need to make that work outside of the physical tools. Like he has the physical tools. He's fast. He's powerful. He's got good snap in his punches. He's got a pretty solid grasp of timing. He's got a pretty solid grasp of really everything that you need, except for the technical depth. He's a very shallow striker. He repeats the same setups, techniques a lot. And that's always going to leave you in a problem when you're playing that kind of game. And I hate to say this, he doesn't seem to have a very good chin. And on top of that, he's got very porous defense. So while he came into the UFC and made a lot of noise beating Matt Brown, I believe that was his first fight. Let me just quickly, second fight. His first fight was against Hector Aldana, who not a UFC caliber fighter. Beat Matt Brown, beat Takeshi Sato. So he had that 3-0 run, looking good. But those are all very, very favorable matchups for his style because in Aldana's case, he's just not very good. In Sato's case, he's not going to pressure you or put a lot of volume out there because he himself wants to stick back and counterpunch. So that's a problem. And then with Matt Brown, you just have a guy who's a little bit washed at this point. Like, still fun to watch fight and everything, but Matt Brown is not the Matt Brown of old. Which makes sense. He's in his 40s. And then he, lost to Santiago Ponzinibbio, lost to Chaos Williams, and now he's lost to Thialo, who are guys who are good. I don't want to say necessarily good pressure strikers because they have their own flaws, but they're forward-moving guys who have a fair amount of athletic ability, who are going to hit hard, and are not necessarily going to be afraid of the volume you're putting out back at them. They're willing to eat a counterpunch or two to land their own stuff. And yeah, it's not worked out well at all for Baeza in those ones. He's not done by any means. He's young. but I do think he needs to relocate to a different camp. And it's not that I feel that the camp he's at is a bad camp. I just think that their track record with fighters trying to develop a style like Baez's isn't very proven. And that's the thing. I think every camp, with a few exceptions, ATT is kind of like an all-train camp. Fortis MMA is also kind of coming up in that regard. But like, if you go to Team Quest back in the day, it was to become a specific type of fighter. If you went to Militich Fighting System back in the day, it was to become a specific type of fighter. And it's still the same now, aka Team Alpha Male, MMA Masters, Sanford MMA, Factory X, all of these gyms, like, they have their strengths, they have their weaknesses, and if you're trying to develop a style of fighting that does not fit into that strength category and more fits into the weakness category, it's not a good fit. And that to me is why he should probably really consider a new camp in that regard. As for Thialo, got his first win in the UFC, big deal. He's a good action fighter. He'll be around for a while, I think. He's exciting. He's fun to watch. Has his own problems with confidence and some hesitation when he's pressuring. That will, I think, bite him repetitively down the road until he fixes it. And speaking of like probably not being at the right camp, Sanford MMA is not the place to gain confidence. It's a place where you kind of have to have a deep well of confidence because of how much of, frankly, an ass Henry Hooft is. But I do think it's at least a technically good place for him, even if I don't think they'll fix his hesitation. And I'm not really sure where it would, because I mean, the mental instabilities of the fight game are probably the hardest thing to solve. It's kind of why I was also like a little bit hinging about like the people were like really certain Kay Hansen's going to be back in the UFC. I'm not entirely sold. But moving on, we had Myra Buena Silva defeating Yanan Wu. Yanan Wu's striking is, I don't want to say terrible, because like it has decent form, it has decent snap, it has a lot of good things about it, but it comes up short. I was watching the Care Don't Care podcast or listening to it, I suppose. There's no video. Kirkland MMA stated like Yanan Wu beat up that woman who was standing 4 inches in front of Myra Buena Silva badly. And that's basically it. It's, if you're watching the video, it's the punch is coming in, and right as about to land, she's already pulling back, and it's like, no, that's going to inevitably shortchange the punches a lot, and it doesn't really work. I'm happy that Buena Silva got the win, because there was a solid chance that like the judges would fall in love with the perceived volume of strikes that Wu was throwing but not landing, and the noises she makes obviously sometimes helps. And I mean, at the same time, Buena Silva really needs to like develop her striking to the point way beyond where it is right now, because particularly she's a really good grappler, but she doesn't use that grappling in an offensive manner almost any of the time. And her striking is powerful, but it is clunky as all heck, and it's big problems. I do wonder if she intends to keep going at 135 for a while, or this was kind of a one-time deal. It does feel like 135 might be a better fit for her. It's a shallower division. It's not nearly as filled with as competent, well put together strikers as 125 is. So maybe that works out better for her, because I think she does have the physicality for it. It's not like she's going to be small at the weight class or particularly weak. I think she'll be a little bit short. How tall is she again? Yeah, 5'6" is a little short, but like it can work. It can work. So, I mean, I don't think she's like champion at either weight class, but it could legitimately be a pretty solid fit actually to go up, especially if she wants to continue to be a striker. I've often said it, fighters that rely on striking can often go up in weight class a lot more than those who are just grapplers, because the size of being in the clinch all the time and going for takedowns and stuff is much more important than it is to be quick and nimble and well put together on a technical level. I am sorry. My nose is really, really stuffy today. I don't know why. Maybe I have a bit of a cold coming on. I don't know. A little vitamin C might help. Pat Sabatini versus TJ Laramie. There's not much to learn from this fight. I thought, like, Laramie is a semi-local, like, extended local guy to me. I live in Ontario, the province of Ontario in Canada. That's where he's from. We're not close together, but, like, it's still sort of a... I've seen him at some events. I've seen him fight. And even with that hometown benefit, I just didn't see how he could beat Pat Sabatini. Did well in the first round. Actually did much better than I thought in the first round, but the second and third really started rolling to Sabatini. Sabatini seemed very disappointed with his performance, which is good. It means that he's going to be demanding of himself and try to be better and better and better. Because the worst thing I think you can have is somebody who has a performance where they're not great. Like, to go back to Ian Gary, just because I brought him up. Like, Ian Gary's 2 UFC performances have actually been pretty bad. He was losing to Jordan Williams up until finishing him. And then Darian Weeks had way more success than he probably should have had, given how raw he is himself and how unstructured his game is at times. But he was, like, really high. Like, that to me is like the warning bell. It's like, you just had, like, this not great performance and you seem really happy with it. And, like, Pat Sabatini is the complete opposite, where it's like, you had this, clear-cut win, and you're incredibly disappointed in yourself, it seems. That's a good sign. That's going to drive him to doing bigger and better things. And I do hope he gets something bigger and better, because this fight didn't really advance him up the ladder. To be honest, he hasn't really advanced up the ladder at all. Like, okay, Jamal Emmers is a step up from Tristan Connolly, so that's the step one. But, like, Tucker Lutz and then TJ Laramie, like, those feel almost like steps downwards. And I'm not really sure what's going on with that. Let me pull up the Tapology rankings here for men's featherweight. And I don't always say who I want to see somebody fight. They have him at 25, which is just below Damon Jackson, Ryan Hall, Alex Caceres. Caceres probably wouldn't work. But Hall or Damon Jackson could be fun. Maybe even someone up as far as, like, Lerone Murphy or Hakeem Dawodu. That could be fun. And even a little bit below him, Zubair Tukhugov wouldn't be terrible, although it's always interesting to book Tukhugov because he has, like, significant visa issues. And I guess you could go with, like, Julian Erosa. That would still be a notable step up from TJ Laramie. So, yeah, there's a lot to do there. I hope Laramie gets another chance. This was just his second fight, and as much as I felt like this was a bad booking for Sabatini, because I didn't think he was going to get any real steam off of this, it's a bad booking for TJ Laramie. It's like, hey, you lost your debut to Derek Binner. Here's a dude who's 3-0 in the division. Yeah, do that. Hopefully that's not just them having no faith in Laramie and just wanting to get rid of him. Hopefully it's just, I don't know. Was this a late notice placement? I am looking for a fight. Yeah, okay. He was a replacement for Melsik Bagdasarian, was supposed to fight TJ Laramie. Okay. So hopefully they still have faith in Laramie, and then this was just a product of that. By the way, talking about visa issues, Munir Les versus Ains Losa. The fight itself went like I expected it to. Lizez is just a little more put together right now. He's a very, very good outfighter. His sniper nickname is, I think, very applicable. It works counters well, good sense of timing, good sense of range, good sense of distance. Losa got it going in the third round. I think he is a guy to look out for, but I think there's a lot of development still to be done for him. That being said, he's at Sanford MMA. They're good at developing the technique. He just needs to maybe be a little bit more combination heavy as opposed to just single strike, and probably get a little bit more comfortable moving forward and cutting off and getting a little bit inside, because he is not super long for the division. I think he's 5'10" ? Let me pull this up here real quick. 5'10", 74-inch reach. Yeah, it's not going to be supremely long in the division. Like, for comparison purposes, Lazzez is 6'1". Granted, only a 76-inch reach, but that does mean that, I think on average, Los is probably going to be facing a 1 to 2 inch reach disadvantage, probably going to be shorter. So he's going to have to get a little more comfortable with being the aggressor, I think, than he currently is. So there's some things to work on. He very clearly lost his fight, but he was getting going. He was making adjustments. So I think, like, by the standards of a debut loss, this was pretty good. I think it's dangerous sometimes to overvalue a fighter in a loss. So I'm not saying, like, oh no, I'm totally going to be picking him next time. It's going to depend on who he faces against. But, like, I do feel good about, like, his ability to develop long-term in this division. But, all right, this is the one, because after the fight, Mounir Lazzez gave a supportive shout out to Daniel Kinahan of just generic, like, my brother, sort of thing. And then afterwards, he got asked about it by Alan Dawson, one of the reporters at the event. And because for those who are unaware, you shouldn't be unaware because this has been pretty big news, but if you're unaware, Kinahan is under U.S. sanctions, has been under, like, criminal investigation for a pretty long time on an international level, for being basically a narco terrorist, I believe is the terminology that they use. Runs cocaine, the illegal activities associated with that, some protection racket stuff as well. There's a particularly grisly story of him killing a cabbie in front of cabbie's family. I don't remember why they killed him, but that's the theory. He's also in a gang war with another Irish gang, all up and down Spain and Ireland, and he's hanging out in Dubai, avoiding extradition, avoiding, standing trial. And Lazzez is represented by a company that Kinahan has links to, so they at some point have met. He's financially supported his career, whatever. And Lazzez, when asked about it, said, "Oh no, I had no idea about these accusations," which is pretty much bullshit. And the MMA fan base as a whole is not receptive to actual journalism. That's something that differentiates it from, like, every other sport. Like any other sport, I don't think that these questions would be considered out of bounds. But in MMA, oh, it is. You ask about fighter pay. You ask about anything that isn't directly the fight. Even though, like, I'm going to use the example of Tony Ferguson, not Tony Ferguson, Tony Kelly, Louisiana-based fighter, who was very anti-mask, very anti-vax, to the point where instead of flying to an event, he drove, I believe it was 13 hours in a car while cutting weight to get there. And people were like, "Oh, how is this relevant to the fight?" Well, of course it's relevant to the fight because he's he's cutting weight in a car while driving. I think that's very relevant to the betting line and who's going to win the fight and how well he's going to perform. And if you need, like, a link between the whole Kinahan thing and the fight, so to speak, Kinahan's also been accused of boxing fixing. So does that affect the betting lines of fighters he's in bed with? Does that impact that kind of stuff? Because, I mean, I think it could have an obvious effect in the cage. But anyways, there's been just accusations, and Dawson's, like, pretty much at the bottom of the pile right now. And people are really going after Kareem Zidane right now. In my opinion, I think for silly things, because they're using, like, the Ian Kidd story. I'm not going to rehash that. It's disgusting. It's whatever. And then also a Vox Media boss who apparently was very inappropriate with young ladies, as, like, Kareem Zidane wants people to hold, like, associates of Kinahan and Kadyrov responsible for their associations, but he's associated with these people. The thing here is that I don't think anyone has actually ever asked for, like, really much in the way of, like, sanctions against people just for being associated with Kinahan and just for being associated with Kadyrov. The push has been that you're associated with people who are doing very globally known crime things, and you're not going to be asked about it. That's not correct. That's not how the journalistic system should work. Whereas the comparisons that they're trying to use in regards to Kareem Zidane is like, how do you feel about your coworker who lives in a different country and you probably never met, getting arrested for kitty porn? Okay, but what are you supposed to know about that? And you can get feelings, whatever. Like, I condemn this, blah blah blah. But like, there's this idea, like, for example, I did work with a guy. He was not my direct boss, but like the level above my boss. I had talked to him in like conference calls, maybe like 5 or 6 times. Never met him. Could not tell you what he looked like. And we worked together. We did air quote work together. And he got arrested for some heinous shit. I don't go terribly into detail with it. But, it'd be like asking me, oh man, you worked at this company with this guy. Like, how do you not feel like absolutely disgusted with yourself? How would I know? How would I know? And people are like the same with like Lizez is like, how do you know? I'm not saying Lizez should even know about the criminal activity, but your own management company has stated multiple times, has released statements about the accusations. You have to know about them. I'm not asking for details. I'm not asking for... Now, mind you, it would be great if Munir Lizez knows something about Daniel Kinahan that could lead to a resolution of this whole thing. It would be great. But I'm not expecting him to come forward and reveal information about a man who we have no idea what the leverage is about him. It's kind of like the Kadyrov situation. But it's still incredibly stupid to shout him out at the end. And people are like, oh man, you're just making him uncomfortable at the press conference. He's in for an uncomfortable time. Because Lizez is a guy who is reliant on the visa process to get into America to fight. And I guarantee you that voicing public support for a guy that the U.S. Treasury Department is very interested in and the U.S. Legal Department is very interested in is going to make that visa hearing very uncomfortable. Very. And that's assuming that they don't just call you in for literal questioning in regards to this. So it's all around an incredibly dumb move. And anyone who's like, oh, poor Moody or Lizez, let's ask him a tough question. Yeah, no, that's nothing. That's the least of his concerns. Like, if the worst thing to happen to him is he got a difficult question from Alan Dawson, he is incredibly lucky. And, I mean, Dana White likes him, so he'd probably professionally fine. They'll probably just put him on overseas cards. But, this is a ridiculous situation. Devin Clark, William Knight in a surprise heavyweight bout. Surprise because, I mean, Devin Clark's fought as low as middleweight. William Knight, of course, is 5'10". He's very, very short. Someone did suggest that he has to fight Ilar Latifi. I agree. Two muscled up, like, sub 6 foot fighters. At heavyweight, let it go. The fight's not super interesting on its own. I mean, Knight does... like. The attempt at the suplex was pretty cool, and he's super powerful. It's kind of intriguing to watch him fight, but, I mean, at the same time, everything about him is clunky, and Devin Clark got the win, like I expected. The only threat was really that Clark can walk himself into, like, the hardest shots known to mankind, and he did do that here a little bit, but, yeah, he handled it. I don't know what this fight means. Like, I have no... more hype or expectation for Devin Clark off of this fight. I think he's going back to 205. That's a good idea. And I don't know what to do with William Knight in general because his fighting style is basically, okay, I'm really strong and really powerful. Does that scare you? No? I'm going to lose. So it's not really much to talk about in terms of what's next for either guy. Pani Kenzad beat Lena Landsberg. Honestly, I come out feeling worse about Pani Kenzad from this fight. I mean, it's not anything new, but the fact that she was so willing to just walk into the clinch with Landsberg, granted, she kind of won there a couple of times, but like Lena Landsberg is the ultimate IQ test of this girl is good at clinch wrestling. She's good at elbowing people in the clinch. She's not particularly dangerous anywhere else. Can you avoid that? And Panikianzad did not seem to have any interest in avoiding where she's strongest. She just wanted to fight her everywhere, and I admire the confidence, but it does also point towards the chronic problem of Panikianzad that she is very, very low fight IQ or just not adaptive. I don't necessarily think it's like fight IQ implies that she's planning around stuff. I think. I just don't think she plans for anything the opponent does. I think she just goes out there and she's going to fight virtually the same every time, and it's going to get her some losses. Drakkar Klose killed Brandon Jenkins. I have nothing much more to say about that. Brandon Jenkins, to be honest, this whole fight was weird because like Drakkar Klose is a pretty established fighter. He's 12-2 overall. I want to say he's got like 6 UFC wins. Let's see here. The Jenkins win are coming to this. Giagos, Bobby Green, Lando Venata, Mark Diakese, Devin Powell. 5. Okay. So 5-2 as a fighter. Losses to David Tamor and Beneil Dariush. I don't understand how you go from fighting Beneil Dariush or even just being booked against Jeremy Stevens to Brandon Jenkins. That is such a step down. Maybe some kind of deal to get him to like not sue the UFC or Jeremy Stevens over the whole weigh-in shove. Someone floated that idea. That's the best idea I've got. This fight was meaningless. Rafa Garcia versus Jesse Ronson. Rafa Garcia gained the win. He looked really good here. I picked Jesse Ronson to win because I thought he would be more active in the pocket. I thought he would win the pocket striking exchanges. He really didn't. I don't know. He looked off. Maybe some time off was not great for him. Maybe he had concerns. I don't know. I mean, obviously there was the PED suspension, so make of that of what you will. But I don't really know. Not that I'm surprised Garcia won this fight. I just thought Ronson looked not typical, and Garcia did foul him with a knee while he was down. See the above statements about the knees to a down opponent. Got the job done though. Did a great job. Eventually won this fight with the rear naked choke, and I'm interested to see where he goes because I mean he's been steadily making his way up the 155 ranks. Came in, lost his first 2 fights to Nazar Haqparast and Chris Grussmacher. I thought that this fight would be a lot like the Grussmacher fight, and it's just not. And then, is beaten Natan Levy and now beaten Jesse Ronson. So it's interesting to see where he goes from here. And, I'm pretty excited for his future. He's a pretty solid all-around fighter. I think there's a lot of potential there. He's got great hustle. He's got toughness. He's pretty well-rounded. I wish I could give like a little bit more specificness to it, but I'm excited to see where he goes, and he could go really kind of anywhere on the ladder. Martin Budai defeated Chris Barnett. I picked Barnett, but I also picked Barnett really just because if he wins, it's going to be fun, and if Budai wins, it's not going to be fun, and it wasn't overly fun. Budai hit him in the back of the head with an elbow. I don't really have much to say about that. I mean, anytime you get hit in the back of the head with an elbow standing, to some degree, it's your fault just because why is the back of your head exposed to a guy? But I mean, obviously, it's also, Budai's got to check his weapons or whatever, and he won the tech decision. I think this was the right outcome. I think even Barnett didn't want a DQ win. He seemed very distraught when he thought that might be the case. Because he lost this fight pretty clearly. The way he's going to lose a lot of fights because he's a 5'9" heavyweight. Put him in there with William Knight and Ilar Latifi, I guess, or Roque Martinez. I know the case has been made for him to fight Martinez a number of times. He's short. He doesn't really have a great infighting game because he's not necessarily a great wrestler, so he gets caught up in wrestling exchanges and clinches. And Martin Budai is a pretty good clinch fighter, so I don't want to draw too many conclusions from it but he did really control and dominate this through clinching and doing his thing. I still don't know where he fits overall, just because Barnett is such a not typical heavyweight stylistic matchup. Being as short as he is and being as not skilled in the way that a short man really has to be. Like he's in the same boat as Ilir Latifi, but Latifi's game is built around being super yoked up and powerful and wrestling heavy, and that can work for a short guy. I don't think Barnett's game actually really does, and that's why Budai winning not terribly meaningful. Jordan Lee beat Trey Ogden. I expected this. Both guys are really kind of still very terrible strikers, very predictable, and not necessarily snappy about it, not necessarily sitting down on punches, delivering power, whatever. I think Leave It has power to deliver. He just doesn't. And Leave It's a better grappler than Ogden. And yeah, this fight went pretty much like I thought. You could argue that maybe Ogden is better fit for the UFC because he's a little bit more put together, but Leave It's a really good grappler. And if your idea to winning involves out grappling him, it's not really going to happen. And sure, his wrestling is still not particularly amazing, and I think that's probably the thing that makes me think Ogden is a little bit more likely to win in the UFC, because I think Ogden has the better offensive wrestling of the two. But Leave It just is an absolute stylistic nightmare for him, and this fight doesn't really change my mind about either guy, aside from Leave It's twerking at the end. Sam Hughes beat Estela Nunez, who got a point taken away for... I am blanking on what she actually got the point taken away from now. Was it eye poking or was it the cage grab? I don't... She did both. There was some eye poking, there was some cage grabbing. And Hughes got the win. Hughes is now at Fortis MMA, which I think is a good idea. But I still don't buy her as a UFC level fighter. There's just an inherent lack of decision in her. Like her corner is screaming at her to wrestle, and she's not doing it. And she's not a authoritative enough striker to really win striking battles. Like Nunez is a really, really limited fighter, and she got the win here because Nunez kind of gassed out a little bit, and also, yeah, again, just has significant gaps in her game. I don't know. I mean, you could argue we haven't really seen Sam Hughes be tested because her debut was against Tisha Torres, who's very, very good at everything, and a really hard debut ask for anyone. And then fought Luma Lubummi, who is very strong at certain aspects, and those are the aspects that I think Hughes needs to be able to win at. And then Luana Pinheiro, who I have some doubts about, but again was a stylistic nightmare. And then this one, where I think stylistically it was a gap fight, even though I picked Nunez to win, but Hughes fought a little bit better than expected. I don't know. I still don't know what to make of Sam Hughes. Nunez will probably flame out of the UFC. I just think that there are just too many huge gaps in her game. And then Haile Alatang defeated Kevin Kroom, 47-second knockout. The other thing really interesting here is that this was Kroom's first time at 135, I believe. And I do wonder if that's just too much of a weight cut, because he's historically been very durable. And the shot that knocked him out, that finished him, definitely had some power on it. I don't want to undersell that, but I do think I've seen him eat harder shots and still kept going. So, I mean, I wonder, is this a case of Kroom cutting too much weight and just paying the price that way? And what does it mean for Alatang, aside from that he's got another win? And he's got a pretty decent run in the UFC going right now, which was weird that he started this fight because, he is now 3-1-1. Probably could have beaten Gustavo Lopez if he didn't get that point taken away. And his only loss is to Casey Kenny, who's a pretty good fighter. So, he's another one that I still don't know the ceiling or the basement of, really. though I do have significant questions about his understanding of his own skill sets, because he seems to really, really want to be a mid-range striker slash an out striker, but I don't think he really has the tools for it, and he's much better as a wrestler. But I don't know. I'd be interested to see him do a lot of different things. Then we move on to the Bellator fights, which was headlined by AJ Mckee's rematch with Pitbull, Patricio. And I have a couple of takeaways from this fight, obviously. One, I think AJ Mckee's corner is terrible. I think Antonio Mckee, who is AJ Mckee's dad, is actually a really, really good coach. I think that environment has led to creating a very, very good fighter. But I had thought his cornering advice, even in the wins, was somewhat questionable. And this one, after 4 rounds, he's like, I have you up 4-0. I'm like, this is at best a 2-2 fight, my friend. Like, at best, AJ Mckee is 2-2 right now with Pitbull, and you're telling your son that he's comfortably up. He went out there and he won the 5th rounds. I mean, I guess it didn't really matter that much, but like the 5th round was also the only round that he got on all 3 scorecards. Now, interestingly enough, I gave Mckee the 1st and the 5th, and I gave Pitbull the 2nd through 4th. I noticed that very few people gave him the 1st. I don't know, maybe I'm alone on that, but I thought in the 1st he did get more done, just more volume. I think Pitbull did land 2 pretty big punches. So like if you're really highlighting the biggest offense of the round, then I think you can absolutely give that to Pitbull. But it's interesting that people gave AJ Mckee the 3rd round when he got caught in the submission hold, while giving Pitbull the 1st round. So I don't know. It was a bit weird. I don't necessarily think it's a bad case of scoring, just an interesting one that isn't supremely consistent. In the end, this is a big win for Pitbull. Obviously, he gets the belt again. That belt definitely means something to him. AJ's been talking about wanting to go to the UFC anyways, so maybe it's a good thing for him to lose the belt. As far as I understand it, he's got 2 fights left on his contract. Like he's done, but the Champions Clause kicks in for 3 fights. That's my understanding. I could be wrong. So if you've got a more reliable source on that, then absolutely go with that. And for all we know, AJ might be a free agent right now. But he also, I think if he expects the UFC to pay him big money, he's in for a rude awakening on that one, because the UFC doesn't pay big money in general, and you're coming off a loss. As for the fight itself, Pitbull did a good job of working the legs, working the body, kept it more or less a standing affair for the most part. He's a very good striker if you have to come to him. And I don't know. I don't know what AJ Mckee's plan really was. He just kind of looked lost in a lot of the striking exchanges, which was weird, because it's like, okay, you've got a massive reach advantage over Pitbull. You should, because you're a well-trained fighter, be able to use this and at least not look lost. At least make Pitbull make some adjustments to you. And it never really happened. Also, you have the faith in yourself that you beat him before. And I don't know. He looked like a fighter who lost the first fight. It was very weird in that regard. But the outcome is what it is. Not sure what's next for AJ Mckee. Obviously depends on the contract situation. Vadim Nemkov and Corey Anderson ended in a no contest after clash of headbutts, so no $1 million check, no title for Corey Anderson, at least for now. I think he'll get it. I think this fight played out very much like I thought it would. Anderson's just a little bit too physical for Nemkov, a little bit too long, a little bit too imposing of a striker. Not necessarily technical, but imposing of a striker. The physicality, my apologies, my phone has decided to go off. I am going to mute that. Okay. As a text message, I just need to put that out there. I might be a little bit late. Anyways, yeah, I'm taking Anderson in the rematch that I assume is going to happen. The no contest is, I think, totally fine. It was definitely a headbutt, despite what Big John McCarthy said, where he thought it was an elbow. It was definitely a headbutt, but Anderson was definitely dominating at the time, definitely doing his thing. I guess you could go to a technical decision as the UFC did. But yeah, I don't see any reason why Anderson can't replicate this performance. Especially, I assume, which could make an ass out of you and me, that this rematch will probably happen fairly soon. And hopefully the $1 million check is back up for grabs, because Bellator's bookkeepers are happy they didn't pay out that $1 million. Aaron Pico beat up a badly outmatched Adley Edwards. It looked a little bit like Sean O'Malley versus Chris Matinho. I know it was a late notice replacement, but I don't know. It's just kind of weird that Pico is like this super prospect that people were talking about when he came in, and somewhat similar to my views on Khamzat Chimaev as well. I'm always inherently thinking that, like, when someone's like, oh, this guy is something you've never seen before, I just think they have no appreciation of history. It's the same thing like with Chimaev beating Burns. Obviously, like, Chimaev is for real. I never doubted that he was for real. I just always doubted that he was going to be anywhere near as good as people made him out to be. And I still have that doubt, because I mean the way people were really hyping Chimaev, he should have just absolutely destroyed Burns in like 15 seconds. Everyone should just die getting in the cage with him. That's the type of hype we're talking about. Pico had kind of like that same thing going on, and it really hasn't manifested. He's fought two particular. Okay, he did beat Leandro Higo. Okay, so he's beaten Leandro Higo. He is the first person to beat Justin Gonzalez, so that's something. But Justin Gonzalez also is a guy who hasn't, like, he has a 12-0 record, and it's a good record. It's not a padded record. People on the record are pretty good. Zach Zane's a good fighter. Taiwan Claxton's a reasonably good fighter. Jake Childers is an undefeated fighter, if nothing else. So he's got some cred, but like, when that's your biggest win, you have it, and you're now 12 fights into your career, and you've lost to Alan Boric and Henry Corrales, fairly convincingly. You have to reevaluate whether that hype is ever going to be realized. I don't think it will, and I don't know. I want to see him tested. I really do. Give me a really good fight for Aaron Pico. I don't really know who to suggest, but well, hang on. Let's put some names together. So he's essentially fighting at featherweight. This was a fight at one catchweight bout at 150, but Pico is a featherweight for the most part. Let's see here. He's currently rated 55 on Tapology. So let's have a look around 55 and see. I don't know. That seems too low for the hype, though. And I got to think of who Bellator actually has on contract here. Manuel Sanchez? Has he fought Manuel Sanchez? Manuel Sanchez is fighting Yancy Medeiros, and he's on a major losing streak lately. So that probably actually does not fit. But that was a name that immediately came to mind. I don't know. Like, looking around him in the roster, there just doesn't seem like anyone that would actually bring me what I want. Like, it feels like he's got to fight someone in the top 50, and that's pretty limited within Bellator, because of course most of the top 50 is in the UFC. Some surprisingly so. Derek Minner's in the top 50. That's interesting. Jonathan Pierce is in the top 50? Yeah. Oh, fuck off. Maybe Mads Burnell? Mads Burnell did lose his last fight, but like, to Adam Boric, but that's probably about it. I'm going to suggest that one. Moving further down, Linton Vassell was losing to Tim Johnson until he reversed him and pounded him out, and I just don't care about heavyweight. Holland Gracie lost again. Tyrell Fortune made pretty short work of Rakeem Cleveland. Pretty expected. Fortune's a massive blue chip prospect at heavyweight. You don't see that much, but he did lose to Tim Johnson and Linton Vassell. So there you go. I still don't know. They originally were gonna have him fight they were originally gonna have him fight Tim Johnson. And then they were gonna have him fight Steve Mowry. So I assume we're gonna see the Steve Mowry fight because that's fairly interesting. And then I am not going to say his first name because I don't know how to say it. But Yagshimuradov beat Rafael Carvalho. Pretty expected. Carvalho's problem at middleweight was not size. I just think that there's inherently some flaws to him. If you can walk into the pocket, into the clinch, and make it a wrestling game with him, you'll beat him. And I think at 205, that's going to happen a lot because these are guys that are used to taking some heavier shots, and they're not going to be intimidated by Carvalho's lack of power. Like, he's got a reasonably well put together boxing game. I like a lot of what he does, but it's not very powerful, and it's very just I'm long reliant as opposed to having the footwork and the defensive abilities and so on to actually be the guy who controls range. And at 205, I think he's just going to increasingly find his reach less valuable, and guys are going to be able to come in and be way more powerful. And that was this fight, getting finished by ground and pound. Bobby Sariano, the third one. Gaston Bolaños won against Daniel Carey. That was a setup fight. Kyle Crutchberger beat Michael Lombardo. That fight has some value, I guess. Edwin De Los Santos won. Rogelio Luna beat Socrates Hernandez. Great name. And these are the fights that obviously just don't feel like they were particularly great. Like, for example, it's like 6-3 versus 7-6. 2-0 versus 1-2. 2-0 versus 0-1, 1-0 versus 0-2, 2-0 versus 4-6, 1-0 versus 1-3. Like, really just Crutchberger and Lombardo have any like resume, frankly, in general, to justify fan interest in them. So that was the action. Pretty good stuff. I thought that for the talent on display on these two cards, both cards delivered. And we should have better next week because next week we've got, if I pull this up here real quick, we got two Bellator cards with Bellator 278 and 279. So at 278, you've got the Flyweight Championship, Velasquez defending against Liz Carmouche. That should be good. You've also got Enrique Barzola on the card, which is always fun. You got Eric Perez on the card. I'm a reasonably big believer in Eric Perez. And none of the fights are like super not relevant outside of Makoa Cooper versus Blake Perry. That's a guy who's 1-0 fighting a debuting fighter. So not particularly. Might long-term be kind of interesting, but and then we got the Cyborg versus Arlene Blencoke fight. That one's really predictable, but Juan Archuleta versus Rufon Stotts. Yes, please. And Patchy Mix versus Kyoji Horiguchi. Olivia Mae McFarland versus Justine Kish. Lance Gibson Jr. is on the card. I'm a big fan. Kai Kamaka III is on the card. I'm a big fan. Godi Yamaguchi is on the card. Yamaguchi, pardon me. No G. I always had the G and I don't know why. And a pretty decent fight between Bobby King and Keone Diggs. Like, not bad at all. Canadian Randy Field. I don't know you. Where are you from? Windsor, Ontario. No gym listed. Okay. And then, yeah, Amanda Lemos versus Jessica Andrade in a pretty meaningful, pretty inciting fight that I'm looking forward to. And then below that, you got Clay Guida versus Claudio Plus, which I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm kind of looking forward to it. It's kind of weird. And then you got Simu Jarji versus Manuel Kapp. You got Charles Jourdain versus Lando Venata. That's very nice. You got Marc-Andre Barrio, Jordan Wright. I'm always a booster for Marc-Andre Barrio. Probably doesn't remember me in any way, but met him. Super cool guy. And They still got Tanner Bozer versus Alexander Romanov listed, but I think that one's off because I think Bozer said that he had gotten hurt, which is a shame because I'm always down to see the Bozer show. So that is all for today's episode, and I hope you enjoyed. We'll be back in a couple days with the predictions for those fight cards. Need to do some research on some of the fighters on it to get an accurate read on it, and I hope to see you then. And I hope you enjoyed the cards.